Today we are going to learn 3 different watercolor techniques. For today's lesson, you only need to make one painting. The first technique is called wet on wet. Begin by wetting a small section of your paper with water. Next, load your brush with a color of paint and paint it on the wet paper. Then add another color and watch the 2 colors mingle and blend. Continue working this way until you have filled your paper. The next technique uses salt to create unique textures in the paint. Start by wetting small sections of your paper with plain water and then adding the color. While the paint is wet, sprinkle a little bit of salt on top. It is very important to make sure that your paint is still wet when you add the salt. If you add salt once the paint is dry, the technique will not work. You will notice that the salt crystals soak up the liquid from the watercolor paint, leaving behind areas without as much color. Using different sizes of salt crystals will create different patterns of texture. Leave the salt on your artwork while your paint dries. Once your work has dried completely, use a clean hand to rub the salt off of your work. The final technique we will explore is called thick and thin. Experiment with changing the thickness of your lines with your paintbrush. To make thin lines, dip just the point of your brush into the wet paint. With a very light touch, try drawing a line as thin as possible. Next, press a bit harder to see what happens to the line. Apply different pressure to create a variety of thick and thin lines in any direction until you have filled your paper evenly. Today's lesson, you only need to make one painting. You can choose one watercolor painting technique to use throughout the entire art piece, or you can combine multiple techniques on one paper. Be sure to fill all of the white space of your paper with color. Later, we will be cutting these paintings up to reassemble them in a new way.